You're speaking of class collaboration with settler colonialism. You've written that the ruling class has historically deployed fascist tactics against Black communities while keeping bourgeois democracy for the settler classes. And in a recent article you published with Anthony Ballas, you made a reference that like Trump is like a neo-fascist, so to speak, coming from like historical and ideological context. Does the nature of internal colonies and like settler colonialism in the U.S. make it almost uniquely predisposed to fascism developing nowadays?
Oh, I think so. The United States is going through some head-spinning changes nowadays. I just gave a radio commentary where I mentioned that listening to Canadian broadcasting, they had a very intriguing discussion about a possible U.S. invasion of Canada, military invasion, and then minimally trying to drive this northern neighbor, in some ways the fifth or sixth largest economy on planet Earth, into an economic ditch, not unlike what has befallen Venezuela, for example. I mean, this was not necessarily envisioned as recently, perhaps as 3 or 4 months ago. I've been using this metaphor that in the North Atlantic community, you have many of the leaders undergoing what I call a collective nervous breakdown. However, I'm going to have to find another metaphor because after the speech by J.D. Vance, the U.S. Vice President at the Munich Security Conference, where he tossed aside the idea of confronting Russia or China and pointed the German hosts in particular into bending the knee to the so-called Alternative for Germany party, which euphemistically has flirted with fascism. After he spoke, the organizer of the conference came to the podium and burst into tears. I mean, I kid you not. It was almost like he was having a collective nervous breakdown at the prospect of contemplating the meaning of what J.D. Vance was saying. And so when you have a U.S. administration seeking to point Germany in a neo-fascist direction, when it's talking about, or at least the Canadians think that they're talking about, a military invasion of their country, when you talk about the U.S. administration engaging in settler solidarity with the former apartheid rulers in South Africa, seeking to put pressure on the African National Congress, South African Communist Party government, because they passed a law that basically mimics the laws in this country concerning eminent domain, that is to say, laws that allow the state to take property from those who supposedly possess it. In this case, the European minority, as a legacy of apartheid, still controls a significant disproportionate percentage of the land. And Mr. Trump, supposedly anti-immigrant, then says that he will open the door of the United States to these Afrikaners, these Europeans, who are fleeing supposedly South Africa. But of course, they're not fleeing because they have a good deal. They have a better deal there than they will ever get in this country. Footnote, however, that you cannot separate that latter point from the remarkable presence of refugees from apartheid in the inner circle of Mr. Trump, starting with first buddy Elon Musk, David Sachs, the AI and crypto counselor in the White House, who, of course, is a refugee from apartheid, Peter Thiel, who kickstarted J.D. Vance's political campaign, not only had roots in Johannesburg, but in South Africa and illegally occupied Namibia. Joel Pollak with Breitbart News, a comrade of the ultra-right, roots in apartheid South Africa, bruited as possibly the next U.S. ambassador to his erstwhile homeland. Rolap Botha, a name you may recognize since his lineal descendant was the last foreign minister of apartheid South Africa, Pete Botha. He, speaking of Rolap Botha, is a leading venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, perhaps the leading venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. And so, given all that I've just laid out, yes, none should be overly shocked nor surprised by the fact that the womb is fertile with regard to the possible birthing of a unique kind of U.S. neo-fascism.